When nature shows its true form, it sends shivers down your spine, and that's exactly what happened with Flight 571. This plane crashed on a snowy mountain, thousands of feet above the ground, and for the passengers who survived this crash, there was only one way to save themselves: to eat the flesh of their own family members and friends. The story of Flight 571, whether you call it the world's greatest miracle or the greatest cruelty in human history, but after hearing this story, you will be shaken to your core. This heart-wrenching story begins on the 12th of October 1972. A chartered plane takes off from the country of Uruguay in South America, destined for Santiago, the capital of Chile. On this plane are rugby players, along with their family members, relatives and friends who are going to watch their match. There are a total of 45 passengers on this plane, including 9 crew members. This flight is supposed to reach its destination in 3 hours, but on the way it has to cross the Andes mountain range. But unfortunately, bad weather lies ahead. Because of this, the flight is made to land in the city of Mendoza, Argentina along the way. The flight stays there overnight, and the next day, that is on the 13th of October, it gets ready to take off again. But the problem is that the weather is still bad. However, the good thing is that the pilot of this flight has already flown this route 29 times before. Because of this, he has a complete idea of how to cross the Andes mountains. Thanks to the pilot's confidence, the flight takes off again at 2:18 p.m. on the 13th of October. From here, only an hour's journey remains to reach Santiago, and the pilot is fully confident that they will safely arrive in Santiago after an hour. The plane was flying at an altitude of about 18,000 feet and was gradually crossing the Andes mountains. But as they moved forward, the weather kept getting worse. Because of this, visibility decreased even further and the pilot couldn't see anything ahead. If the weather had been clear, the pilot could have figured out the plane's location by looking at the surrounding mountains. But at this moment, the pilot is relying solely on the plane's instruments. Now, since the pilot knew that they would reach Santiago in an hour, he kept estimating their location. And after an hour, when he felt that he had crossed the Andes mountains, he requested permission from Santiago Airport ATC to land the plane. ATC asked if he had crossed the Andes mountains. The pilot replied that yes, he had crossed the Andes mountains. ATC was also relying solely on the location provided by the pilot. So ATC, permission was granted for the plane to land, and the pilot was told to bring the plane down to an altitude of 11,500 feet. At 3:21, the pilot began gradually lowering the plane's altitude. As the plane descends, the pilot sees that the Andes mountains are still continuing and there is a huge rock right ahead. The pilot quickly tries to pull the plane up again, but by then it was already too late. While trying to lift the plane, its tail hits the mountain and breaks off. Because the tail section was gone, the seats at the back along with the passengers were thrown into the air and 3 passengers were lost mid-air. In this collision, the plane's right wing also broke off. Because of this, the plane becomes unbalanced, causing its other wing to hit the mountain as well, and it also breaks off. Now, only the front part of the plane was left, which crashed into the glacier below at a speed of 350 km per hour. The plane was completely destroyed. The plane's pilots are killed instantly. Out of 45 people, 12 have died in this incident and 33 are still alive. But most of them are badly injured and they don't even know where they are at this moment. The crashed plane is scattered on an unknown mountain of the Andes, at an altitude of 3,570 meters above sea level. No one knows whether they will be able to escape from this mountain or not. What has happened so far was just a small trailer. The real story of this flight is about to begin now. You can't even imagine what is going to happen to them next. These desolate Andes mountains are about to unleash havoc upon them. When you hear the rest of their story, it will send chills down your spine. Among the injured passengers was Nando Parrado, who had suffered a head injury. Because of this, he slipped into a coma. The problem was that the sun was about to set soon and evening was approaching. Because of this, the rescue team didn't have much time to find them, and by chance, if they weren't rescued before it got dark, it would be impossible to survive the night on this icy mountain. Because here, the temperature at night drops to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Soon, 4 aircraft were dispatched for the rescue. These 4 aircraft searched the Andes mountains thoroughly, but they didn't find anything anywhere. Because the plane had crashed in a place covered with white snow and thick fog, and the plane itself was also white. Because of this, the rescue team couldn't spot the crash site from above. Soon night fell and the rescue operation was called off for the night. Was postponed. The remaining passengers hoped that somehow they would just get through tonight. They believed that someone would surely rescue them tomorrow, so they made shelter in the crashed plane and spent the night there. This night was terrifying for them because they had to endure temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius, but they still had hope that someone would find and rescue them the next day. With this hope, they somehow managed to get through the night. However, 5 people could not survive the night, and now the number of survivors dropped from 33 to 28. The next morning, on the 14th of October, the search operation resumed and 11 aircraft took off to look for them. But the problem remained that the crashed plane, because of its white color, was not visible at all among the snowy mountains. The rescue team's aircraft were flying right over the survivors, but they simply couldn't see them below. Because of this, the survivors tried to write SOS on the plane with lipstick to signal the rescue team, but they realized that the lipstick wasn't enough to write such a large SOS. So they used their suitcases to make a large cross on the snow, hoping it would be clearly visible to the rescue team from the sky. That day, 3 airplanes flew over them, but unfortunately, none of them noticed the survivors, and another day passed by. The next day, that is the 15th of October, the situation remained much the same, but the rescue team was still unable to find them. By now, the survivors had realized that they were in serious trouble. There was no telling when help would arrive. Because of this, they started using items from the plane to create survival tools. By melting snow in the sunlight, they managed to collect water drop by drop, but they had very few options when it came to food. 3 days after the crash, on the 16th of October, Nando Parrado woke up from his coma, and as soon as he regained consciousness, he realized that his mother had died in the crash and his 19-year-old sister was seriously injured. Day by day, time kept passing. No help was arriving. The food that was on the plane had also run out. The sunlight, reflected off the snow, was damaging their eyes. Enduring hunger, thirst, and unbearable cold, they had now spent 8 days on this mountain. Rescue planes would come and fly right over them. 8 days after the crash, Nando Parrado's sister also loses her battle for life and passes away. Meanwhile, after 8 days, the search operation is called off because in October, there is heavy snowfall in that area. Because of this, the search operation is suspended for 2 months. Office, the search team believed that all the passengers must have died within these 8 days. Because of this, their dead bodies would be found after 2 months and sent to their families. Meanwhile, the survivors found a radio in the wreckage of the plane. When the survivors turned on the radio, they heard news being broadcast about themselves, stating that the search operation for Flight 571 had now been called off. This news left the survivors in shock. Until now, they had held on to hope of being found. But now, they were hearing news of their own deaths on the radio. The last ray of hope of being found had also been shattered. Now they knew that death here was inevitable. Now, either let the circumstances overpower you or face them head on. They tore apart the plane seats and stuffed the cotton into their clothes to try to protect themselves from the cold. They wrapped seat covers around their feet to make shoes for walking on the snow. The biggest problem was food. Now, to stay alive, they had only one option left: to do something that no one in history had ever done before. Something so horrifying that just thinking about it would make your soul tremble. They decided to eat the dead bodies of their family members, relatives, and friends, people they had once played and laughed with lying in the snow. However, making this decision was not at all easy for them. Day after day kept passing by, one after another. They had no plan to save themselves. At night, to protect themselves from the cold, they would sleep inside the wrecked plane. But 16 days after the crash, on the 29th of October, nature dealt them yet another blow. They were sleeping at night when suddenly they realized that a large chunk of snow was breaking off from the mountain and falling down. The avalanche struck with such force that the massive amount of snow engulfed their wrecked plane. Their plane was now buried under the snow, and snow had even entered inside the plane. Because of this, they suffered from a lack of oxygen, and due to suffocation, 8 more people lost their lives, leaving only 19 survivors. But even they were trapped under the snow. It took these people 3 days to get out from under the snow. Now, they realized that if they stayed here, everyone would die one by one. It would be better to get out of this mountain and try to find help. Most of those people were injured. Because of this, they were not able to cross the mountain. But there were 3 people who were less injured, so those 3 decided to leave the mountain and bring back help. They took pieces of meat with them for the journey, were given the thickest clothes to protect themselves from the cold, and after 33 days since the crash, that is on the 15th of November, these 3 set out to look for help. They see the rear part of the plane that had broken off and separated. When they go near the wreckage, they find a lot of food in it. They decide to spend the night there. Compared to the last few days, tonight was a good night for them. In that rear part of the plane, they found a battery. They thought, why not take this battery to the main body of the plane and use it to power the communication device to call for help. But the battery weighed 25 kilograms. In such a weak condition, it was impossible to carry such a heavy battery to the crash site. Then they thought that instead, they could remove the communication device from the main body of the plane, bring it to the battery and power it up, so they could call the rescue team for help. For several days, they tried to get it working, but they were not successful. And 59 days after the crash, on the 11th of December, another avalanche struck in which 3 more survivors lost their lives. After that, the number of people still alive was reduced to just 16. And now, these 3 young men Canessa, Parado and Vizintin set out to climb the glacier without any gear. The 3 of them keep walking westward, but they have no idea whether they will find any human settlement in the direction they are heading. They just felt that they had to cross the mountain in front of them and they would find help, and they hoped to cross this mountain in 3 days. That's why they only took enough meat supplies with them for 3 days. They had sewn together a sleeping bag using thread. So they would climb the mountain all day without any gear, and at night, the 3 of them would huddle together in a single sleeping bag. Spending the night out in the open without any amenities in minus 30 degrees Celsius was no easy feat. As they kept walking, it was already the morning of the 4th day. But the good thing was that they had now reached the top of that mountain. As soon as they reached the top of the mountain, the ground slipped from under their feet. Because after climbing the mountain, they realized that the direction they had been walking in for so many days was the wrong one. The path ahead just never seemed to end. Now, since they had very little food supply left, they decided that one of them would go back to the crash site and the other 2 would continue forward. Because of this, Vizintin turns back, while Parado and Canessa keep moving forward. After climbing to the top of that mountain, they are able to figure out the correct path, and the 2 of them keep moving forward for several days. After a few days, they come across a small stream. They continue walking downstream along that stream. And after traveling continuously for 9 days, on the 20th of December, they saw 3 people on the other side of the river. They were extremely exhausted from all the walking. In the past 9 days, they had hiked 61 kilometers through the mountains, and now their destination was right in front of them. They pleaded for help from those people, but they just said tomorrow and left. That day, they couldn't get any help. But the very next day, that villager came back and wrapped a piece of paper and a pen in a stone and threw it across to the other side of the river. Nando Parado picked up the pen and paper and wrote down everything that had happened. When that villager read the paper, he understood everything because he knew that a few days ago, a plane had crashed in these hills and people had come to that area to investigate. But he was amazed at how these people had managed to survive until now. The villager quickly went to the city and shared this information with the army command, and soon the Chilean Air Force arrived to rescue them. Army officers took Parado and Canessa in a helicopter to the crash site, and on the 22nd of December 1972, 70 days after the crash, the remaining survivors were rescued. The condition of these people was extremely poor. After this crash, only a total of 16 people were able to survive. Their story is truly a heart-wrenching one. But there is an even more dangerous survival story, that of a man who was stranded in the deep sea for 438 days. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a small boat was his home. An open sky under which he had to endure the scorching afternoon sun and the cold of the night. A lone man wandered the desolate sea for 438 days, that is, 14.5 months shopping for help. This man's survival story will truly astonish you. You can watch this story in the video showing on your screen. I will definitely see you there at the designated time and place.